Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar from the Association of Specialist Fire Protection on fire doors. We're just waiting for a few more delegates to join, and then we'll be on our way. Numbers are coming steadily up now. There are quite a lot of registrations for this one, so we're expecting quite a good attendance. I'll just wait another few moments and then we'll start. Okay, on the basis that I will now progress with the webinar. So how today will work. Good afternoon again, everybody who's just joined us. How it will work is we'll have a webinar, which is a presentation given by myself, followed by Q&A. We also have, you can ask questions if you wish, and you do that by putting in the Q&A box, which is available in the menu at the top or bottom of your screen. If you want to have a chat or want to make a comment, there's also a chat box, and these will be moderated, and we'll look at these at the end. There's also going to be some polls when we run during this webinar. Just check you're all still engaged. I've asked some questions, don't worry, nothing too testing. And then we'll have a Q&A session, and then we'll sum up at the end. So the ASFP has been running a number of webinars for the last 2 years. These have really taken off since we started doing, since COVID took in, and we've done about 6 or 7 this year. Today's one is on fire doors, and we have another one on the 8th of December. The quiet title is still to be decided. We're still mulling over a couple of options. And also to note that this webinar has 1 hour of CPD. So if you want a CPD certificate, please email info@asfp.org.uk within the next 2 weeks. And that email address will come up again at the end of the presentation. So moving on, what we're going to touch today, a little bit on the legislative background and the update, because as I'm sure you're aware, there's an awful lot of stuff going through Building Safety Bill, etc., Fire Safety Act, Fire Safety Act, and so on. We'll have an ASFP fire door video, and I'll talk a bit about fire resistance door sets and door assemblies and what makes them tick, and then a check, what you need to do if you want to check fire doors, mainly, for example, if you're a fire risk assessor. Finally, if you're having to approve or if you're procuring fire doors, what documents should you look for in terms of their fire test performance? And then finally, we'll have some information on where you can get further independent advice, and then Q&A. So without further ado, we'll have poll question 1, please. So poll question 1, what is your interest in fire doors? Numbers, who are you? And there's a number of items there: architect, designer, manufacturer, a local authority, approved inspector, fire risk assessor, facilities manager, or other. So if you'd like to vote there, you only get one choice of this one. And when we've had enough votes, Georgina will give us the results of the poll and see how widespread you are. And the results should be coming up any second now. And that seems to be quite a few others. Quite a few fire risk assessors and quite a few architects, designers and specifiers. That's great, that's good stuff. Okay, thank you for that. So that's interesting to get the different numbers. Hopefully this presentation and webinar will be aimed at all of you. So legislation, passive fire protection, as probably several of you have heard me speak before, is built-in measures to protect the structure of the building, so it stands up, and subdivide it to limit the spread of fire and smoke. What's the legislation that covers it, and therefore fire doors, as they are part of passive fire protection? Well, the main considerations is Regulation B3 from the Building Regulation 2010, and it's concerning compartmentation, where reasonably necessary, the building shall be subdivided with fire-resistant construction. Compartmentation stops fire spreading. It enables means of escape by protecting escape routes. It gives the fire services time to fight the fire and also gives them some protection. So fire doors are all about maintaining compartmentation, but of course, while also giving access for people into and out of buildings. And when we look at the statutory guidance to the building regulations, and here we have the table from the 2019 version of approved document B, and I say equivalents because there are, of course, equivalent documents in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. But the provision for fire door sets, we've got a nice table there. There's some other explanatory tests. So, for example, in a compartment wall, if it separates a flat from the space in common uses, E30SA, I'll explain that in a minute, or FD30. E30SA, E30 is the European standard test for 30 minutes fire resistance. E means it's integrity only, and SA means it has to have smoke seal as well for ambient smoke protection. And the FD30 on the right-hand side, which is basically the equivalent in UK spec, FD for fire door, 30 minutes, and S is again the ambient smoke test. Now you see there's a number of these, this table doesn't finish, it's got a compartment wall and etc. and it goes on there and many other types as well. But it gives you a feeling for what the kind of provisions that there are. When we look at this in a little bit more to explain it, if we talk about fire resistance period, that's how long the door will resist fire from one side of it to the other. And the two test methods there are BS 476.22 or EN 1634. And the ratings are given in the table below. So you've got British standard FD 30, 60, 90, 120, and the European one is exactly the same. And the fire resistance periods are obviously between 30 and 120 minutes. So that's fire. What about smoke? Well, if you want a smoke door, then the test for smoke is the BS test 476 part 31.1 or EM 16343. And this is an ambient temperature, so smoke leakage temperature. And you have these classifications there. And if you see there again, they've got FD30S, FD60S, FD90S. So to be a smoke door, these will be smoke doors that are also fire doors. You can have smoke doors that are not fire doors, but they're pretty rare. They're nearly always fire door as well. The fire door has to pass the British standard fire test, and then the smoke leakage test, and the same thing for the European fire test and European smoke leakage test, which are both very similar. Okay, so that's the basic legislative requirement, is the approved document and the statutory guidance document. And of course, we all know what happened 4 years ago on the 14th of June was the Grenfell Tower fire, and fire doors were implicated partly in terms of some of their performance. Because of that, we had the Grenfell fire, and then we had Hackett inquiry. Hackett inquiry on the review of building regulations. And that led also to the phase 1 of the Grenfell public inquiry. That was chaired by, still is chaired by Sir Martin Morbid. His report of phase 1, which I recommend because it's only about a 30-page read. It's actually very good, very short, not like some of these documents. That the owner and manager be required by law. Now, he put this term required by law. That meant that the public inquiry is recommending that the law is changed. And the recommendation is to carry out regular inspections of fire doors every 3 months. Now, there was some discussion backwards and forwards about whether 3 months was too much, not enough. You'll get your annual inspection as part of the fire risk assessment under the fire safety order. But you see, there's an argument for certain areas, for traffic areas or hospitals or other buildings, you need something a bit more than that. But that's the outcome from the Grenfell inquiry, and that converted itself this year into part of the Fire Safety Act, which amends the regulatory reform fire safety order. Apologies for all these bits of legislation. And what that did is said, you will include flat front doors in a fire risk assessment. To be fair, many assessors were already doing that. It's not something that they, excuse me, they didn't do. But now it's in legislation. And of course, as you also be aware, they've also included external walls in it. That's actually a lot more onerous problem. So that's come into the Fire Safety Act. The Fire Safety Act again doesn't specify the periods of fire, so I think that will be down to the fire risk assessor, but also I'm sure there will be other guidance coming out of government from there. As well as the Fire Safety Act, we've got the Building Safety Bill. Now, the Building Safety Bill is come from a different department. It's come from what was the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, but is now the Department of Levelling Up Communities and Government. And in addition to all the things like the new regulator for high risk buildings, the gateway stages, the principal designer, principal contractor role, there's hidden away at the back is the power for the Secretary of State to create a list, there's a little list, of safety critical construction products, which is the definition of on the right of the screen, anything that could cause a risk or cause death or injury to person. And that legislation will mean that safety critical products will have to have a more stringent testing and certification regime. They may not use third-party certification as we know it, but it will be something pretty close, I expect. Products must perform as expected, and information must be reliable and true. And the new Department Office of Public Safety and Standards has been confirmed as the construction products regulator. There's also a code for construction product information. This came out of the Hackett report, needing to improve construction product information because some of it was slightly misleading, let's put it that way, or not telling the whole truth, or not telling without telling lies, without telling the whole truth. And so there's a code of practice, which is run by the Considerate Constructor Scheme. It's a code of practice for manufacturers on how to produce and quantify and moderate and have quality construction products information. Right, we're now going to have a short video on fire doors.
Fire doors must be checked regularly, as they are crucial in protecting escape and maintaining compartmentation. Fire doors are usually made from timber or steel. The level of protection that a fire door provides is generally measured as the time it takes before the door assembly allows the passage of hot gases and flames. Typically, they are rated as providing 30 or 60 minutes of protection. Timber fire-resisting doors normally require a gap of around 3 to 4 millimeters between the door leaf and the frame. To maintain fire resistance, the gap is normally protected by an intumescent seal installed in either the door or the frame. The intumescent seal expands to seal gaps in the early stages of a fire. If the door contains a glazed panel, it will also normally be fitted with an intumescent material. To restrict the spread of smoke at ambient temperatures, smoke seals may also be fitted. Occasionally, metal fire doors may be more appropriate than timber, for example, where fire resistance of more than 1 hour is required. To identify a door and its rating, you should look for a label or plug from a third-party certification scheme, such as those displayed here. Labels or plugs from certified providers are a reliable indicator that a door meets the designated fire resistance. Labels usually indicate the period of time that a door will resist fire. Each label is generally numbered. This is useful in tracing the door manufacturer if a replacement is required or there are problems. Old doors are unlikely to have labels, but if they are a solid, heavy construction and similar to other fire doors in a building, they probably are fire doors. If there is any doubt, a professional opinion on a door's performance must be obtained, or a proven replacement fitted. Gaps around doors should be limited to 3 to 4 millimeters. Gaps larger than this are unlikely to hold back fire and smoke. In older buildings, doors may not have intumescent strips, so only a nominal 20-minute fire resistance can be expected. Current recommendations are that a door with an intumescent strip affording a minimum of 30 minutes of fire resistance is fitted. Metal doors are not usually fitted with intumescent strips. Many fire doors are now fitted with smoke seals that prevent smoke spreading at normal temperatures. These seals are usually polymer blades or brushes. An assessor should check that smoke seals are present and in good condition. They should completely fill the gap between doors and frame. Fire door ironmongery is complex, and the combinations of hinges, latches, and push plates are almost infinite. Many are not compatible with each other, or particular types of door leaf and frame. Most fire doors will be hung on 3 or more hinges. If the door has dropped due to failure of hinges or fixings, or if the door does not close properly, remedial work should be undertaken as soon as possible. Fire risk assessors should also check for the presence and the condition of intumescent seals. These should be fitted at the top and both side edges of the door. Intumescent protection for ironmongery should also be used to prevent early door failure. This is especially important for 1-hour fire-resisting timber doors. It is very important that self-closing devices close fire doors completely. Rising butt hinges are acceptable for older properties, but are not recommended now. Failure to close correctly or overcome the resistance of the latch can usually be rectified by correct adjustment of the door closer and/or striker plate. Many fire doors are held open by automatic door release. When the fire alarm is activated, these devices must release the door, and it should then fully shut. Correct operation should be checked and records kept. Doors used for means of escape, which may not be fire doors, for example, final exit doors out of a building, must open easily. Only one hand movement, such as turning a lever or pressing a push pad or bar, should be needed to open an emergency escape door. All fire doors must be adequately signed. Extra security locks should not be fitted to fire exit doors. If additional security is required, there are a variety of CE marked electronic devices that unlock with the fire alarm. If a fire door protecting a means of escape is fitted with an air transfer grille, it needs to be a type that is linked to a suitable fire detection alarm system. The fire risk assessor should check that the operation of any air transfer grilles has been regularly checked and recorded.
Right, I trust you appreciated that fine-looking fire door assessor in his suit walking around that series of buildings, but never mind. Okay, moving on. Fire doors are, the most recognised breach of compartment walls. We have compartment walls, we stick things through them like cables and pipes and ducts and dampers, and obviously fire doors. And fire doors are one of the worst. Sometimes they're seen as an inconvenience and often wedged open. And of course, COVID seems to made an excuse, well, we can't touch the handles anymore, so it catch COVID, so they're wedging them even more, which is a bit worrying. And finally, fire doors can subject to intense and almost continuous abuse. Just go and look at the hospital and you'll see this. Anyway, right, so it's very important that fire doors hardware are maintained in good condition including things like hinges. You don't see rising butt hinges much these days, and they do work, but they will not shut a door properly to the full position, so they are not a proper closing device. Ceiling strips that come out or are broken, latches, and this unique take on a hold open closer. This is not obviously, you know, fire alarm goes off, that door's going to stay open, and obviously vision panels need to be made of glass and not stuck on with bits of tape and so on. Every product, every fire door should have been tested to the appropriate British standard or the European standard as appropriate. And for timber fire doors, it's less important than steel doors. Door frame gaps are quite important. Usually 3 to 4 minutes, rather than the door there where I remember that door, I can actually stick my fingers in it, so that's not suitable at all. And that also points to a failure of the ironmongery. So now we're going to the second poll question, which is all about the types of things that you might have seen that are wrong in fire doors. So can we run the second poll, please? In your line of work, what's the most common faults you see? And you've got a variety of things there: ceilings that are surrounding construction, gaps that are too large, damaged, missing seals, doors that don't shut, wear and tear, damage, and poor, inadequate ironmongery. And it's multiple choice, as in you can put more than one answer. I expect a lot of you will put all of the answers on, but there we are. Let's see what we get and see what you see. So we're waiting for people to do their answers there. Give them maybe a little bit longer because it's multiple choice. And George will run the poll, and when the answers are come in, that screen will disappear and we'll get the answers up. Right, so the answers are coming now. And the biggest one is large gaps, followed by damaged, missing, and tumescent strips, and then doors that don't shut, and then poor ceilings surrounding construction and where, okay. All right, that's quite good. Gaps is no surprise, strips is no surprise, and doors that don't shut. The fire door doesn't shut, it's useless, you know. Anyway, okay, so we move on now. Fire doors are made of a number of elements. We touched them in the video, but to reinforce them there, their main things are the door itself, usually referred to as a door leaf, frame, the hinges, and other ironmongery, including the door closers, locks, latches, push plates, letter plates, etc. Glass and any vision panels, and obviously the smoke and fire seals fitted around the edge of the door. All of those must work in combination to ensure that the fire door will work. A fire door is not something you can cobble together on site. Oh, I've always done this and I use a bit of this and a bit of that. You haven't got evidence to show it, it won't work. It has to be tested as a precision engineered product. So consequently, when we test fire doors, we don't just test a leaf or a frame, we test a complete item installed in a wall, as you can see in the photograph there. It's very important to specify door sets and door assemblies, and I'll define those in a minute. It's also important not to change the specification. Oh, we can get cheaper ironmongery. Oh, we can use this blank here. Not a good idea. It won't work. The door sets are door assemblies. It might sound like they're the same thing, but they're not. Oops, beg your pardon. A fire door set is a complete item that comes from a factory. It all comes from one source. They fit together. Fire door assemblies are bought from many different organisations or companies, and they're normally assembled on site. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. Fire door assemblies allow a greater variety of products, but fire door sets are more complete, and I think would be possibly a better direction for the industry to go in terms of one less problem with fire on site. You know, passive fire protection is complicated enough without having to wonder where I'm going to get the signs, the glazing, the smoke seals, and the latch and the lock from. We produced a book for fire risk assessors on what to look at in terms of passive fire protection when you're undertaking a fire risk assessment. And the idea of this book was to introduce the roles of the assessor and associate the passive fire protection with the means of escape, which is where most fire doors or many fire doors are on there. It isn't a full compliance of a building survey with ADB, and it contains a checklist. So going through what to check on the fire doors, and the first question of is it a fire door? Are there voids? Are there labels or plugs? Fairly straightforward enough. If it's a solid door, it may well be a fire door. What's the condition like? If it's in good condition, that's good. If it's bad condition, that's not so good. It's very obvious. Door gaps we touched on earlier. Is the frame sealed to the opening correctly? No good having a brilliant fire door and frame if the junction between the frame and the wall is not sealed or badly sealed or not secure. Is there suitable armoury? Fire doors will normally be hung on 3 hinges or more, sometimes, usually 3 hinges. The operation of the lock, the latch, and the striker must be checked, and the ability to self-close. If it doesn't self-close, it's not right. Self-closing can often be adjusted in terms of the closer. These things are, you don't need to fit a new closer. It doesn't necessarily need to fit a new closer. Often it just needs adjustment. And you also check that any knobs and handles, etc., are secure. You don't want to see things like this. On the left, you've got a void at the top of the door. That's where a spaniolet, a bolt, a chute bolt that went up to the ceiling or up to the frame above has been removed and been replaced by a face fix bolt. Unsuitable hinges in the center. Damage is as you can see on the right. And also when you think about maintenance, other things you might see, the photograph on the left is a pair of doors, pair of double doors, and there's a gap between where there should be a smoke seal. And as you can see, you can actually see the contents of the office behind, which kind of indicates that that's not going to work. Central photograph is a door frame which is not adequately sealed to the surrounding construction, and the one on the right is again the glazing with tape on it, which will catch fire. Other things they contain are the presence and condition of strips, as touched in the video, not only around the periphery of the leaf, but also any protection to ironmongery. And in the photograph, bottom left-hand photograph there, you've got a wire within a glazing bead, and there's intumescent strips within that glazing bead. It's either there to keep the glass cool or to compress it or to squeeze it and stop it moving. If there's a hold open device, does it work on release of the fire? You know, does it work to release? If the power fails, does it release? If the fire alarm goes, does it release? And it's got their records of checks. It needs to be checked as part of the fire risk test. You need to be checking that these systems are working. Panic exit devices, as touched on at the end of the video there. They're not fire doors. That's the point, because the external fire doors are nearly always not fire doors, but they're part of fire safety and need to get out and should be considered as part of a fire risk assessment and must be operated by one hand. And you can't put devices on, or you shouldn't put devices on, even cable ties. People say, oh, plastic cable ties, they're all right, they're break. Not if you're an 80-year-old woman. So devices that lock doors, and even if they could break them, the fact that you've got a plastic cable tie around a door visually sends the message, you mustn't use this exit, which is, of course, exactly what you don't want. And air transfer grills, they cannot, you know, you see these in fire doors, and sometimes they're just activated by intumescent, and that's fine. But if it's on an escape route, it must be connected to the alarm. And again, to check the records that happens. The other thing to look for is third-party certification. I'm going to go a little bit more. I'm going to explain a bit more about that later. Where third-party certificated installers use and were third-party certificated doors use. There's labels, some examples of some labeling systems there, and labeling helps two things. One, it shows you it's a quality door because it's third-party certificated. Two, it helps traceability. All these labels have got a unique number on them. So if there's a problem with a batch of doors, you can go back later and find out and address it. So we now move to poll question 3, please. Poll question 3, please, George. Right, so that's there. Are you aware of third-party certification of fire doors? That's a single choice. yes or no. It's a nice straightforward one. And hopefully you'll be able to answer that one fairly quickly. The answer's coming up there. 90% and 10%. Good. I'm actually, these days, I'm surprised even to see the 10%, but we'll come on to that later on. So the message has still got to get there. All right then. Right. So all questions come off at 10. Right. So we now got another video. Great stuff. More videos. Less work for me. A video, courtesy of BWF, that's British Woodworking Federation, which shows you an example of what happens if you mix and match components and don't put them together properly. So we'll have a quick look at that.
Fire doors are designed to save lives and property. They're a vital part of a building's passive fire protection system. When they're installed correctly, they protect escape routes, prevent the spread of fire, and will restrict the amount of oxygen feeding the fire. But to perform fully, correct specification, fitting, and maintenance is essential. If you take shortcuts or think you can save money by compromising or scrimping on specification, such as fitting incorrect or cheaper components, then it's time to think again. The building regulations across the UK are very clear. Any small differences in detail may significantly affect the rating. So what happens when you get it wrong? Sadly, it's only when a fire breaks out that the consequences of your actions are known. This short film was shot under test conditions at the UCAS-approved test house of Exover Warrington Fire and shows just what happens to fire doors when components are fitted incorrectly, or worse, not included at all. We tested 3 identical 30-minute fire doors, fitted into identical frames, all with correct 3mm gaps between the door and frame. Door A was glazed incorrectly, using toughened safety glass and with no intumescent seals in its glazing system. The intumescent smoke seals around the door were fitted in pieced sections rather than in continuous lengths along the 2 long edges and across the top. Door B was also glazed. This time, the correct fire-rated glass was used and was installed using an appropriate fire door glazing system. All other components were fitted as described in the manufacturer's instructions. Door C simulated a typical fire-rated entrance door installed in flats and apartments, complete with an ordinary letter plate and viewer, but with no intumescent seals between the door and frame. It's a situation we often find, where letter plates are fitted without any correct fire protection or where a non-fire rated door has been installed. As the test starts, smoke begins to appear from all the doors, as the facings on the doors burns almost immediately. Although this reduces on the central door B, it remains significant on the other 2 doors in the test. Almost immediately, cracking is heard coming from door A as heat reaches the glass. And after only 4 minutes, the glass dramatically fails and the door is engulfed in fire and smoke. Imagine if that door had been in a hotel corridor. The fire could have rapidly reached other parts of the building where occupants were trying to escape. Frightening situation. The door is sealed to allow the remainder of the test to continue. It's now 5 minutes into the test, and the letter plate on door C falls out, setting fire to the outside of the door. Imagine if this was in a block of flats. Fire and smoke would spread down the corridor, endangering the lives of the residents, as well as causing a potential significant fire risk to the fire and rescue authorities. To continue the test, the burning letter plate is extinguished, and the letter plate slot in the door is sealed. Our focus continues on door C, the door with no intumescent seals, which has not only allowed smoke to pour from its frame surrounds, but is now starting to glow red hot as the fire burns through from the edges. As this part of the test reveals, intumescent smoke seals are crucial in the installation of fire doors, Without them, not only is the fire rating of the door reduced by 50%, but by now, killer smoke would have been spreading to other parts of the building for over 15 minutes. The door is now sealed as we focus on door B, the remainder of the test. We're now approaching and then exceeding 30 minutes, and our correctly glazed and correctly installed door is still holding back the fire, doing what it was designed and engineered to do. It's 33 minutes before this door finally gives out. The test complete, the view from the fireside reveals more. You can see how doors A and C are completely burned through, threatening danger to the fire and rescue authorities, whilst the correctly installed door in the middle is charred but has remained intact. Remember, fire doors are not ordinary doors. They're engineered fire safety devices. Their correct installation and maintenance is vital in preventing fire and smoke from spreading, saving property and protecting lives. For further information about the correct specification, installation and maintenance of fire doors, visit bwf-certifier.org.uk.
Okay, now you mentioned the BWF video mentions certifications, something the ASFP is very strong on, recommendation for third-party certification of products. Why do we need third-party certification of products and what is it? Consider three situations. Self-certification, where a manufacturer or whatever says, I've tested this door, he might have made a claim, or one who's got a test report from an independent laboratory, or one that holds third-party certification. This self-certification is tested or designed to comply with BS-EN 1634. Was it? Where's the proof? There's no guarantee that it was actually being done, or if it's been tested, that it passes. So it leads to uncertainty. There's no impartiality. The test report, they've been to a laboratory and had a test done. That's really good. It's a big step up. It's third-party involvement and that is independently tested. But it's a test on that particular door test, on that particular door that was sent to the lab. I used to run a fire lab. People used to send me all sorts of stuff. I've no idea what went out of their factories. What's representative it produced? It's a test. It's a special to get through. What if they change the design? What if they change material? It leads to uncertainty. With third-party certification, you demonstrate product conformity. The company's quality management systems are inspected, their factory production control system is inspected, their auditing procedures, samples are taken for tests, the certification body goes to the manufacturer and says, I'll have that door there, and that's the one that's taken for test. And that gives you the confidence. And that's why the ASFP is very keen on third-party certification. We always recommend the use of third-party certification for products. And for our installer members, it's mandatory that they have to hold it. There's no question. You can't be a member unless you have it. And these are certification bodies. We represent that. So when you're procuring or specifying fire doors, you need to have obviously some form of due diligence. And as we probably heard now, we recommend you use third-party certification. But what if you don't have that for whatever reason? You're all third-party converts now because I told you. But what happens if you don't have it? There's a number of other types of documents that support products in the market, and it's a bit bewildering. I wrote a load of these, and I know it's a bit bewildering. You've got test reports, classification reports, a whole list is here, manufacturer's data, third-party certification, engineering judgment, assessments, technical evaluation. What do we do with this? It's all a bit hard. So let's just try and put that in some kind of order. I've used the terms worst and best. It's probably a bit strong, but it's what I thought was the best way of doing it. So worst and best, manufacturer's data sheets. Well, obviously, that's a manufacturer's word. And as you said, third party is the best. And then you've got a number of ones in between there. You might notice that test reports are still quite a way down the list? Well, the answer is I might have a test on a single action, single leaf door, but apart from the fact it's not representative of construction, you might be looking at a double action, double leaf door with transoms or over panels or side panels or some variety or in a different wall. So you've got to make sure the whole thing compliant. And that's why actually a good assessment or a desktop study, we don't like that term, is actually a better way of doing it. So poll question 4, please. Poll question 4, I think is what you've got to see. Okay, in your line of work, what have you seen used to approve the purchase of installation tools? So it's multiple, so you can tick more than one. So if you can have that, please. It's the last poll, so you know you won't be able to. You won't have to worry about being asked any more questions. So again, manufacturer's data, test reports, extended application reports, assessments, or third-party certification stroke C marking. And when we get a suitable number of answers, George will put the poll results of the poll up and we'll see where we are. I'm expecting to see a bit of a mixture. I don't really quite know what I'm going to see in terms of which is going to be the biggest one. And the answer is third-party certification. Oh, that's very good. Actually, in some respect, that's not surprising because the door industry is one of the industries that has embodied third-party certification more so than, say, fire stopping, which is lagging a bit behind. Not much assessment and manufacturer's data and test report. That's interesting. They kind of moved to the two extremes. Okay, all right. Okay, so we close that now and we'll move on. So one point, I want to get this in. I think this is quite important. This is a checklist, things you should be checking, whether you've got a test report or an assessment or manufacturer's data or third-party certification, whatever you do, a few things to check. Ownership. What do you mean ownership? Ownership. Do they own it? You're buying a door from Joe Bloggs and Company. Does Joe Bloggs and Company name on the test report, or has he stolen it? It does happen. Is it complete and is it all one? Is it complete? If it's a test report from a UCAS accredited laboratory, it will have page 1 of 52, page 2 of 52, etc. Check it, it's all there. And oneness, is it all one test report and not being mixed with other materials in? Because it does happen. You'd be surprised what you see. Here's a very important thing. I've just seen this quote in the chat saying, never see any of it. God, all right. Relevance to installed product. Is it the right size? You know, if it's a test on a little door, that won't cover a big door. Orientation, not so much horizontal and vertical. We do have fire doors operating in horizontal. A test on a single door doesn't cover a double door and vice versa. What type of wall is it mounted? Is it rigid or supported? Are all the materials and components included? For doors, because the next one for doors, there's symmetry, opening in versus opening out. The standard, normally you test both sides of the standard of the door. It's not necessary from the point of view of severeness. In fact, the European standard contains rules for determining the weakest side, but that's only applicable to certain types of doors, not composite doors. The ministry, in terms of MHCLG, have kind of specified you must have double-sided tests to remove the ambiguity on that. But I can tell you both the steel and timber door industries have reliably used single-sided testing for signs. But either way, if one side is tested, can you check that the other side is tested? What supports it? Swing, pivot hung, is it hung on pivots, the top and bottom? It's very different from hinges, side panels, over panels, transom panels, ironmongery, period of fire resistance, usually just integrity. There's no requirement for insulation on fire doors in the UK. And also beware test certificate. I've got a certificate of test. You have a test report or you have third-party certification. A certificate of test is meaningless. Okay, so further sources, we're coming to the end now. Further source of information. I mentioned the ASFP guide to passive fire protection for fire risk assessors. We also have a guide ensuring best practice for passive fire protection in buildings, which is a kind of guide from cradle to grave and preempts, because it's a document that was revised into about 3 or 4 years ago. It preempts a lot of what's come out of the building safety bill in terms of the golden thread and making sure that information is passed down the chain and that are involved early. There's an organisation called ASMA, Association of Specialist Door Manufacturers Association, and they've got a best practice guide to timber fire doors. If you Google ASMA, you'll find it. And they've got some data sheets as well. Another organisation is, I mentioned earlier, because the video, the British Woodworking Federation, and they have a preferred third-party certification supplier, and this was a certified scheme operated by Warrington. And they have the best practice guide, and again a number of short documents. They used to have one large document, but that seems to disappear, which is a shame because it was all in one place. But they've got all these other things as well. So that's really the end of the presentation as such. And now we're going to move to the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and hopefully I can now see the chat boxes. I had a little bit of situation earlier, but whenever I tried to look at the chat box or the Q&A box, it stopped the presentation. But I think we've resolved that now. Okay, so you're now going to hear the dulcet tones of Chris Sharman, who's the new head trainee for the ASFP, and he's been moderating the questions, eliminating any difficult ones, I hope. And he's going to ask me some questions, or maybe he'll answer some himself, and we'll see where they are. So, Chris, where are we then? Which ones are we going to have?
Right, Niall. I have been answering some of the questions on the Q&A via text as we've been going along. Some of the ones on the chat that have come in quite early on. A simple one that I think for you is, which is considered more onerous, BS476 or EN1634?
Right, that's a simple one. I can answer that one because I did about 10 back-to-back tests of British standards versus European standards. In fact, I did 55 tests of British standards versus European standards for the Radar 1 research project, which was used to amend approved document B. EN tests tend to be more severe because the thermocouple, the sensing element that drives the furnaces, is slower to respond. So in other words, you have to put a bit more heat in the furnace for it to show the temperature. And for fire doors, it's kind of 5 to 10% more severe. So you find that the doors tested to EN1634 should theoretically be a little, and I mean it is very small, the 10% of 30 minutes is 3 minutes, is a little bit better than Terry's Boers tested BS476. Also the neutral pressure plane, the plane at which we have positive and neutral pressure in the furnaces, is lowered in the European standard, which means that some items of ironmongery get caught up in it. The EN is worse, but not a lot.
Okay, hopefully that's answered that question. Next one from Andre Sabea. Can 60-minute doors be placed in 120-minute compartment walls, or do they need to be the same fire rating as the compartment wall?
Normally, depending on the design guidance, whether it's used, it's half the fire resistance of the compartment wall. That's an approved document B, and was in one of the slides I put up earlier.
Yes.
But some design guides like BS 9999 or 9911 might, or other design guides might say, no, we want the same fire resistance. But normally it's half the fire resistance in approved document B.
Okay, going across onto the Q&A. During the testing for the fire resistance, what is the ambient temperature minimum and maximum to withstand the approved time duration? Is there a specific minimum maximum test temperature in the fire tests?
Well, during the fire test, I mean, that could be either a technical question on fire testing, where there are limits in the fire test method for the laboratory the laboratory must not be too hot when they start the fire test, or too cold. I believe that's problems with the European fire test method, because some of them are done in quite warm places. In terms of the insulation, which I fear the questioner might be pertaining to insulation, in other words, how hot does it get on the unexposed face? And as I mentioned earlier, there are no requirements for insulation in the UK for fire doors. The reason for that is simple. If you have a fire wall, if you've got materials leaning up against it, touching it, and the firewall gets hot, it catches fire. People tend not to lean things against doors because when they open the door, it falls in. So in other words, fire doors don't need to be insulated. Not the same in other European countries. Some of them do have insulation requirement, but generally it's not required.
Okay, let's see what else we've got on the Q&As. So older doors, can we retrofit smoke seals, bat wings, intermittent strips, and if they're okay, and make the doors okay, or does every door have to be replaced? This individual James deals with blocks of flats and almost never sees a certified door, especially on the flat doors.
I'm going to answer that. It depends. It's a simple answer to that. Oh, no, it's not a cop-out. There are some very good, solid, heavy, well-built doors, well hung on ironmongery that can be upgraded quite easily by fitting of strips, and they'll give you at least a nominal 20 minutes and probably give you half an hour. You might need you might need an assessment from a laboratory if you wanted to be sure of it. But in other cases, if the door's in poor condition, if the ironmongery is poor, or if the door is very thin, like some raised and fielded panel doors are very thin, then probably replacement is the answer. There are ways of upgrading fire doors. Some upgrading is relatively straightforward because there's not much needed. Some of them, for example, actually manufacturers that produce sheets of intumescent material that go in between the raised and fielded panels. That means taking the door apart, a heritage door, taking the door apart and rebuilding it. And that is quite a very skilled object. That's not something that the average DIY could do, or even the average door installer could do. We're not generally fans of upgrading, but we do agree. Some people say, "Oh, the doors are," and we've had situations. The contractor members of the ASFP have said, "The door gaps are wrong," and they're saying you've got to rip them out and refitting them. We're going, "No, you don't need to do that. You just adjust it. There must be a way around it." So the answer is it depends. You have to, if you're an assessor, you have to make a judgment.
Excellent. Thanks, Noel. Mike Kelly on the chat. We commonly experience detailed discussions regards historic conservation doors. Is there any guidance to help the on-site assessments of the fire risks inherent with historic or conservation doors?
There is, and I can't lay my hands on it, but I know that Trada, it might be BM Trada, it might be under Warrington Fire, have produced some guidance for upgrading of historic doors.
As I understand,
check on their website, they have.
Mike does mention that Steve Emery's done some work on this within the IFE working group. They did recently issue a publication on fire resistance of historic doors. I'm looking it up on my IFE files now. I'm sure I have it somewhere, but it was published by the IFE. There was a pamphlet on this from Steve Emery at the Historic Buildings Group. So I'll see if you can find that. It'll be on the IFE's website.
Okay, all right, but will that be accessible for members of this on the webinar now?
I'll see if it's on the general publications that are open to the public. I may have to answer that one offline later.
Okay, all right.
You're welcome.
Any more? We've got about 5 minutes left, so we've got some other questions. I've just spotted one. Does the fire performance of the door reduce after several years? Generally, the answer is if providing the ironmongery is kept, it's fixed well, it doesn't fall, and it's adjusted and checked regularly, and the gaps are okay. The general answer is no. No, I've tested fire doors that were 30 years old and they still work perfectly. They should be fine. Normally something else gets rid of them, either office refurbishment, or they just simply get mechanically too damaged to continue. But generally they're usually fairly, unless the timber shrinks unusually to perform gaps, which you might see in a heritage door, but then they were never designed to be fired. then yes, it would be. All right, you put it in the chat. I see that now. Okay.
Thanks, Donald. Okay, in answer to a question that I answered on the Q&A earlier regarding fire risk assessors carrying out FRAs and having a lack of information about fire doors, I did suggest if a risk assessor was not certain of the compliance of the fire doors on site, then perhaps they would recommend to their clients as part of the FRA to have a separate fire door survey carried out. In answer to that, Guy Doyle on the Q&A has said that many fire door surveys fail the vast percentage of doors. They caution clients against blanket approaches. Quite often it needs to be remembered that a contractor may have a financial interest perhaps in then going on to gain work. So always an independent contractor for your fire door surveys. So there's no commercial conflict of interest is the best way to put it. Let's have a look what else we've got on here.
Yeah, there's quite a deal. We've done fire testing on both sides.
Okay, I think we've got a few more.
We've got another one here. In the old care home with damaged doors, would you expect to replace the leaf or the whole door and frame set? If the frame is in good condition and is covered by the new leaves test evidence, i.e. there's a certain type of thickness and density of frame, it can be hung correctly with the correct gaps, and if that frame is in turn sealed correctly into the opening, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do it. But you as recommending that might have to take on some liability on that, but there's no reason why it can't be done. There's no reason you have to necessarily do that from a fire perspective.
So,
I recently inspected the floor with an exposed core to the top of the leaf, rough cut. Can this pass the test? I've been informed it is okay. Right, I have my doubt as some stickers have been added, but clearly not added at the factory. That one smells really fishy, if I might say so, versus answer that question. Doors are nearly always framed up one way, if nothing else but lipping, but often they're held with the frame, the core, which might be chipboard or flaxboard or some other material. They're nearly always framed up construction. If the core is inspected, unless that's part of the door blank, I would be very wary about it. And the simple answer is, if you can find out the manufacturer, go and ask them. That's what I would do. But I'd be very wary if the frame was there. Yeah, the sessions all come at the end when we're finishing. Right, okay, it's 13:58, so I'm going to try and bring proceedings to a close now, unless anybody's got anything you think you need to bring in. Yeah. It's a nice one. I'll finish in this one. We've got a couple of minutes. Will the recommendations made following Grenfell for improvements to construction products information cover making checking fire door certification easier to understand? I've seen many global assessments from third-party certificated manufacturers who detail all the details, configuration, scope of certification, but as a buyer end user, they are ridiculously difficult to understand. Anyone else have this? Well, our view is quite simple. One of the reasons we support third-party certification, not just because of all the quality thing and the checking for that, is third-party certification tends to produce a third-party certificate of approval, a certificate, third-party certification, and that covers all the combinations and variations of the fire door, what sizes, whether you can use a single action, double action, whether it's a pair, whether it's single doors, what arm angle you do on it. And that's much easier to understand because they are normally only a few pages long than something like a global assessment or something where you're looking at pages and pages of detail. I mean, we have in this country a bespoke fire door industry, which tends to create lots and lots of different designs. If you go on to continental Europe, they tend to live on fire door sets rather than door assemblies. They're one item, and because of that, the range you get is much more limited. It does mean it's easier to understand. but the certificates of that's issued by the certification bodies is often a better way of being able to take on board all the combinations and permutations. It's now 2 o'clock. So I think at that point, I'm going to call a halt on the proceedings. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Please stay on. There should be a survey appear at the end of it, and done that. The email address for the CPD, did that not come up? Maybe I didn't put it on the presentation, but we will check. We will put it on. I think it's info@asfp.org.uk. Fairly straightforward. I'm not going to give you mine. I don't want to get bombarded with it. But there we are. Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed that and enjoyed the Q&A. I called the thing Fire Doors and Introduction, and that was a bit of a whistle-stop, low-level, not in-depth examination of fire doors. You can talk all day about fire doors because there's so much to do, but they are so important, probably the most important item of passive fire protection. Okay, so with all that, thank you very much and have a very good afternoon and goodbye from the ASFP. Thanks now. Bye-bye.